I'm very grateful for the opportunity again to be here at the launch of the Social Justice Statement for this year, 2018. The statement brought back a few memories for me, one of which was when I was living in the house where Archbishop Hickey is living at the moment in Highgate, which used to be the presbytery. I came home one evening. The garage is at the back of the block. There's a long driveway down the side of the house, and the further you get down the block, the darker it gets. And I got out of the car and then I made my way to the back door of the house, and there I found two bodies on the back veranda, alive, thank goodness. And they were of a young Aboriginal woman and a young, how would you call him? He's not Australian. You can't just say he's Australian because she's Australian too. But Anglo-Saxon, I'll put it that way. And they were a couple. They'd been together for some time. They'd had a baby, and the baby had been taken from them and was put into care. And unfortunately, they were living rough. And it was winter time, so the only place they could find for shelter was that back veranda. So I allowed them to stay there, following the example of Archbishop Hickey, because he used to do the same sort of thing at his little cottage at the cathedral. And that gave me the opportunity to learn about their life, to learn about them, to understand a bit their circumstances. Then one day I heard that the little baby had died, but because the department couldn't find them for 2 weeks, they didn't know. So you can imagine the grief that they were experiencing when they discovered that the little child had died and had been dead for 2 weeks already. So that's just one example that I had of getting to know a couple who I presume are still living in those circumstances. And they are a couple that make up that number of 116,000 people in Australia who are living in that situation. Of course, we know that many people are living in that situation for a whole variety of reasons. And this is the reason why the bishops chose to make the statement for this year, for Social Justice Sunday, one on the question of homelessness. I think we had about 4 topics to choose from last year, but this was the one that got the resounding vote of the Bishops' Conference, because in every one of the dioceses around Australia we have that experience, that very similar to experience that I've had myself. The document makes a very strong point, perhaps its major point is that housing is a right and it's not just a privilege. And this, I think, goes back right to the very first, the first writings of the Bible, on the writings of the law of Moses. And there is a law there that the Jewish people followed, that it was permissible for you to take what was your right to take from someone because they owed you. You could take everything, including their cloak. But the law said you must return the cloak to that person in the evening, because that cloak served as a covering during the night. This is a law which the Jewish people, I presume, were at least aware of, that might not have always followed it. Because, as we know, the enticement of advancing one's wealth means that we can make decisions that are purely based upon what we want for ourselves, what we can receive, what increase of wealth that we can make for our lives. And that will, in many cases, will compromise that perspective of looking beyond our own needs and our own rights and our own aspirations, and will mean that we become blind to the needs and the rights, and especially in the case of homelessness, that fundamental right that people have to a place to call home. So this statement, and I think the words of Pope Francis in his letters, in his speeches on this question of homelessness, will always bring us back to examining our own hearts and our own aspirations, and always putting before what we want the needs of others, particularly the needs of others in our community for a place to live, for a place that will give them a sense of security. But as Pope Francis would also say, it's a place that also gives a sense of self-worth, not just of protection. One of the little facts that come through in the document here is that in 1947, 50% of Australians owned their own home. By the mid-1960s, that proportion had grown to 72%. Since that time, however, home ownership rates have fallen to around 65%. Since the 1990s, the greatest decline in home ownership has been for people in the prime of their working lives. It's likely that an increasing number of people currently under 55 years of age will enter their retirement not owning a home or still paying off a mortgage. There's a lot of other facts there in a well-researched document which I think will be very interesting to us and will inform us on the question and the challenge that homelessness provides to us today. Some years ago, the heads of churches asked to have a regular meeting, if not just an annual meeting, with the Premier of the state. The Premier that we approached at the time didn't want to meet with us at all. Colin Barnett became the Premier, and he immediately contacted us and sought an appointment with us and sought to establish an annual meeting with the heads of churches. The very first issue that was raised, and the one that received so much support from him, was this issue of homelessness. And at that time, there was a program that had been agreed to by Commonwealth and state governments to do something about homelessness across the nation. So it was in that spirit that he then worked with us, and as you might know, with the help of St. Vincent de Paul, there now is yet another hostel in Perth, which has been named after Tom Fisher, a well-known Catholic supporter and worker for St. Vincent de Paul over many years, who's passed away in the last 12 months or so. So that was the outcome of a collaboration between the churches and the state government. It seems that these sorts of policies and these initiatives have perhaps been put on the long finger since. So this document, I think, helps us to understand the context that we are in, where we need to voice, to be a voice for the voiceless, to be a voice for those who are homeless in our community, and to keep raising this question with those in government. Of course, government can't do everything, but at least we need them to be partners with us in these sorts of initiatives. The last thing I would say this morning is that Pope Francis, in the letter that he gave to the Church earlier this year on holiness, gave a beautiful, how would you say, a commentary on the Beatitudes. And one of the points he makes when reflecting on the Beatitudes is the Beatitudes help us to see the needs of others around us, and for us then to see a way in which we can respond to the needs of others. But he said there's another benefit, and that is for us ourselves to be changed, to see in the other the face of Christ, and in a way, by practicing the virtues that the Beatitudes present, to ourselves being transformed and made more human and made more Christian. So it's with that thought that I would end this little introduction. Recommend very highly this document and suggest that it be a document that parishes and agencies and communities within the Archdiocese would take up and would at least read, reflect personally, but perhaps in groups to reflect upon its contents, to reflect also how it may be a way in which we could see the needs of others around us in our community, and as communities, as parishes, as agencies, to find ways to work together in order to bring some alleviation to this problem. So it's my pleasure then to officially launch this document, and perhaps also a little ad. At the back of the document you'll find a reference to what a subscription to the Australian Social Justice Council would bring to you, and that is that you would be able to receive these other documents that are produced by the Council: Justice Trends, the Catholic Social Justice Series, and other papers and discussion guides. So these, I think, are very valuable documents, and ones which can inform us even more, not just on the question of homelessness, but on other social justice issues in our country today. So I officially launch the document today, and I thank Carol and the members of JEDO for the invitation, and I ask the Lord to bless her and the work of JEDO in the year ahead. Thank you.
Bishop.